The silver spoon clattering against bone china sounded like a gunshot, but it stung less than the word trash slipping from Raymond Sterling's wine-stained lips. He thought my silence was submission, a fatal mistake for a billionaire who forgot to check who held his company's debt. He called me trash, never suspecting that I would burn the aviation empire he spent 40 years building to the ground in just 48 hours. My name is Sally Whitfield, and as I stepped through the 12-foot mahogany doors of the Sterling estate in the Hamptons, I felt less like a guest and more like a biological specimen being introduced into a sterile laboratory. The air inside the mansion was chilled to a precise, preservationist temperature, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old, stagnant money. This was supposed to be an engagement dinner, a celebration of the union between Julian and myself, but the atmosphere suggested something closer to an autopsy. I smoothed the fabric of my navy blue dress. It was a sensible piece, purchased off the rack at a department store for $80. It fit me well, hugging my frame with a modest elegance, but in this room, amidst the sea of silk, chiffon, and hand-stitched Italian lace, it might as well have been a burlap sack branded with a poverty warning. The dining room was a cavernous hall dominated by a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen tears, casting a fractured, merciless light on the guests below. These were not friends. They were Raymond Sterling's business partners, board members, and sycophants, a flock of vultures in tuxedos and evening gowns, their eyes sharp and hungry, waiting for a carcass to pick apart. Julian squeezed my hand as we approached his father, but his grip was clammy. My fiancé, usually so warm and animated when we were alone in our small apartment in the city, seemed to shrink the moment he crossed the threshold of his childhood home. He was 30 years old, but in the shadow of Raymond Sterling, he reverted to a terrified teenager. "Father," Julian said, his voice cracking slightly, "you remember Sally?" Raymond Sterling did not stand up. He sat at the head of the table, swirling a glass of deep red liquid that probably cost more than my entire college education. He looked up, his eyes scanning me from my sensible heels to my lack of jewelry. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he just stared, as if waiting for me to apologize for existing in his peripheral vision. "The girl from the warehouse," Raymond said. It wasn't a question, it was a label. "Logistics, actually," I corrected him, keeping my voice level. "But yes, I manage the flow of goods." "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair placed deliberately far from Julian. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The first course was a cold cucumber soup that tasted like watered-down indifference. The conversation around the table flowed over me, excluding me with surgical precision. They talked about summer homes in the south of France, the fluctuating price of thoroughbred horses, and the annoying new zoning laws in Manhattan. Whenever I tried to engage, asking a polite question about the art on the walls or the weather, the conversation would halt. A few seconds of awkward silence would hang in the air, and then they would resume talking as if I had not spoken. I could feel their eyes on me. I heard the whispers, a woman to my left, draped in enough diamonds to fund a small hospital, leaned toward her neighbor and murmured behind her hand. She thought she was being discreet, but my hearing has always been sharp. "She looks like the help," the woman whispered. "Did Julian pick her up at a truck stop?" Her neighbor giggled, a brittle sound like glass breaking. "It's a phase, just like that time he wanted to be a painter. Raymond will fix it." I took a sip of water. I wanted to tell them that the necklace the woman was wearing was a fake, a high-quality cubic zirconia replica, and that her husband had sold the original 3 months ago to cover gambling debts in Macau. I knew this because I knew who had transported the original. I knew everything about everyone at this table. My company, Oceanic Core, handled the shipping and logistics for nearly every luxury brand and private importer on the East Coast. I saw what they bought, what they sold, and what they tried to hide in shipping containers marked as industrial equipment. But I remained silent. I was playing the role of Sally the simple warehouse manager, the orphan girl lucky to be allowed indoors. The main course arrived, filet mignon so rare it looked like a crime scene. Raymond tapped his knife against his wine glass. The sharp, rhythmic clinking silenced the room instantly. "A toast," Raymond announced. Standing up, he held his glass aloft, the liquid catching the light like blood. "To the sterling legacy, for 4 generations, this family has stood for excellence. We have built wings to conquer the skies. We have maintained a standard of purity, of class, that separates the wheat from the chaff." Julian offered a weak smile, thinking his father was finally acknowledging the occasion. "Thanks, Dad." Raymond ignored him, his gaze locked onto me, heavy and suffocating. "However, maintaining that legacy requires vigilance. One must be careful not to dilute the vintage with cheap vinegar." The room went deathly quiet. The servers froze in the shadows. "I have been doing some reading, Sally," Raymond said, his voice dropping to a theatrical baritone. "Or should I call you Jane Doe number 4? That was the name on your intake file at the state orphanage. Wasn't it?" My heart hammered against my ribs, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of his cruelty. "I don't see how that is relevant to my engagement to your son. Mr. Sterling?" "It is entirely relevant," Raymond sneered, abandoning the facade of the toast. He walked slowly down the length of the table, stopping right behind my chair. I could smell his cologne musk and arrogance. "You see, in our world, pedigree matters, breeding matters. We don't just let strays in off the street because our sons are going through a rebellious phase of mediocrity." Julian shifted in his seat, his face pale. "Dad, please, not now." "Shut up, Julian," Raymond snapped, not even looking at his son. He kept his eyes on me. "You claim to be a manager of what boxes crates you spend your days sweating in a warehouse with truck drivers and laborers. You reek of common labor." "I work for a living, Raymond," I said, dropping the Mr. Sterling title. "It's called earning your way, something you might not be familiar with, given you inherited your chair." A collective gasp went through the room. The woman with the fake diamonds looked as if she might faint. Raymond's face turned a shade of crimson. He leaned down, his mouth inches from my ear, his voice a venomous hiss that carried clearly to every corner of the silent room. "Listen to me, you little gutter rat. The Sterling house does not tolerate trash. You are an infection, a temporary lapse in judgment." He straightened up and addressed the room, his voice booming. "She thinks she can marry into this family. She thinks she can inherit the Sterling name." He turned back to me, his expression twisted into a sneer of pure disgust. "You can warm Julian's bed if he is that desperate for a warm body. Whoredom is a respectable enough profession for someone of your station. But don't you dare dream of sitting at this dinner table as a daughter-in-law. You are nothing. You are the dirt we scrape off our shoes before we enter the house." The word trash hung in the air, vibrating with malice. I looked across the table at Julian. This was the moment. This was the test I hadn't realized I was administering. I needed to see if the man I loved was a partner or a prop. Julian was staring at his plate. His knuckles were white as he gripped the tablecloth. He was trembling. "Julian," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. But they were tears of fear, not righteous anger. He looked at his father, then at me, and I saw the calculation happen in real time. He was terrified of being cut off. He was terrified of the old man's rage. "Dad, don't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. It was a pathetic, whimpering sound. He didn't stand up. He didn't flip the table. He didn't tell his father to go to hell. He sat there, paralyzed by his own cowardice, letting his father strip me naked emotionally in front of 20 strangers. That silence broke me in a way Raymond's insults never could. Raymond was an enemy. I expected fire from him. Julian was supposed to be my shelter. Watching him cower was like watching the foundation of a house turn to sand. The pain was sharp, agonizing, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, numbing clarity. Sally, who wanted a family, who wanted to be loved for herself, died in that chair, and the CEO of Oceanic Core took her place. I didn't cry. Tears were a currency these people did not deserve. I picked up the linen napkin from my lap. It was heavy starch, white and pristine. I folded it neatly into a square, taking my time, smoothing out the creases with deliberate, steady hands. The silence in the room stretched thin, tense as a violin string about to snap. I placed the napkin on the table next to my untouched plate. Then, I reached for my left hand. I slid the diamond engagement ring off my finger. It was a sterling family heirloom, or so Julian had told me. Now it just looked like a shackle. I placed the ring on top of the napkin. The metal made a soft clink against the china. I stood up. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made several guests flinch. I looked Raymond Sterling dead in the eye. I didn't glare. I didn't scowl. I looked at him with the professional detachment of an auditor noting a discrepancy in a ledger. "Thank you for the dinner," I said, my voice steady, clear, and devoid of any tremble. "And thank you for the lesson on value, Mr. Sterling. It was incredibly educational." I turned my gaze to Julian one last time. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He was staring at the ring on the napkin, looking like a lost child. "Goodbye, Julian," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a closing statement. I turned and walked away. I kept my back straight, my chin up. I could feel the heat of their stares on my spine. I walked past the servers who looked at me with pity, past the portraits of dead Sterlings who looked down with judgment, and toward the massive front doors. Behind me, I heard Raymond let out a short, barking laugh. "Run along," he called out, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Go back to the gutter. She's running away because she knows she doesn't belong. Shameful little creature." The guests murmured their agreement. A chorus of weak-willed sycophants validating the bully. He thought I was running. He thought I was fleeing in humiliation, eyes full of tears, crushed by the weight of his greatness. He thought he had discarded a piece of trash. He had no idea he had just handed a demolition order to the wrecking crew. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool night air of the Hamptons. The gravel of the driveway crunched under my sensible heels. I didn't look back at the glowing windows of the mansion. I didn't look back at the life I thought I wanted. I walked toward my old Ford parked in the shadows of the luxury SUVs and limousines. My hands were steady as I fished my keys from my purse. The air smelled of the ocean and impending rain. The dinner was over. But the real work was just beginning. The rusted suspension of my 10-year-old Ford groaned as I navigated the sharp turn at the end of the Sterling driveway. To the security guards watching on the monitors, I looked like a defeated woman retreating to her sad, small life. I kept my speed steady, my hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, maintaining the charade until the very last second. But the moment the heavy iron gates of the estate vanished from my rear-view mirror, the weeping fiancé died. I did not drive back to the city. I did not drive to a motel to cry into a cheap pillow. Instead, I drove 3 miles down the coastal road and swerved sharply onto a gravel path marked with a restricted access sign. The Ford bounced over the uneven ground, kicking up dust, until the trees cleared to reveal a private tarmac illuminated by blue ground lights. A sleek, black Augusta Westland helicopter sat on the pad, its rotors already slowly turning, slicing through the humid night air. Standing beside it, illuminated by the flashing anti-collision lights, was a man in an impeccable charcoal suit. He held a tablet in one hand and a long cashmere coat in the other. I slammed the car into park and killed the engine. I stepped out, leaving the door of the Ford wide open. I would not be needing it again. Marcus, my chief of staff, and the only person who knew every single one of my secrets, stepped forward. He did not ask how the dinner went. He did not ask why I was early. He simply looked at my face, saw the icy resolve in my eyes, and nodded. "Good evening, Ms. Whitfield," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the whine of the turbine. He held out the cashmere coat. I shrugged off the cheap cardigan I had worn to play the part of the poor logistics manager and let it drop to the dirt. I slipped my arms into the coat Marcus offered. It cost $40,000, lined with silk, and it felt like armor. "Burn the car," I said, walking past him toward the helicopter steps. "Consider it done," Marcus replied, falling into step beside me. "We are cleared for immediate departure to Manhattan." I climbed into the cabin, sinking into the cream leather seat. The interior smelled of aged leather and success. As the pilot increased the throttle and we lifted off, leaving the Hamptons below, I watched the sprawling lights of the Sterling estate shrink until they were nothing more than a cluster of insignificant sparks in the darkness. For 2 years, I had played a role. I had dimmed my light. I had pretended that my knowledge of logistics came from stacking boxes in a warehouse in Queens, rather than from designing the proprietary algorithmic shipping routes that powered 40% of the global supply chain. I closed my eyes and let the vibration of the helicopter center me. The world knew Sally Whitfield as a ghost, a name buried behind shell companies and trusts. They knew Oceanic Core, the titan of global shipping, but they did not know the face of its founder. I was a mathematical prodigy. That was the part of my file Raymond Sterling had missed when he looked up my orphanage records. He saw a discarded child. He failed to see the girl who finished calculus by age 8 and was trading stocks under a pseudonym by age 15. I had built my empire brick by brick, container by container, leveraging raw intelligence against a world that underestimated young women without pedigrees. I had hidden it all for Julian. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could buy. I wanted to know that if I lost every dollar tomorrow, the man holding my hand would not let go. Tonight, I got my answer. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my dress. It was the cheap prepaid model I used for my Sally the Manager persona. The screen lit up with Julian's name. I stared at it. I could picture him, huddled in a bathroom or a hallway at the mansion, whispering apologies he didn't have the spine to say to my face. He would tell me his father didn't mean it. He would tell me we could work it out. He would ask me to come back and apologize to Raymond, to smooth things over. I slid the back cover off the phone and popped the battery out. Then, I removed the SIM card. It was a tiny piece of plastic, no bigger than a fingernail, but it contained the last 2 years of my life. The text messages, the photos, the voicemail logs of a romance that was built on a lie, not my lie about my money, but his lie about his character. I slid open the small ventilation window next to my seat. The wind roared, cold and violent. I flicked the SIM card out into the void. It disappeared instantly, swallowed by the night sky over the Atlantic Ocean. "Marcus," I said, my voice hard enough to cut glass. He was already looking at me, his tablet ready. "Yes, ma'am." "Activate the Sterling Protocol. I want a full forensic audit of Sterling Aviation. I want to know every debt, every creditor, every lawsuit they have buried, and every regulation they have bypassed. I want to know the name of Raymond's mistress, the balance of his offshore accounts, and the expiration dates on his pilot certifications." "I have the preliminary data already caching," Marcus said. Tapping the screen, "I can have the deep dive analysis ready by the time we land." "Go deeper," I commanded. "I want the skeletons he thinks have turned to dust, and set up a war room meeting, legal, finance, and acquisitions. Get them to the penthouse. I don't care that it is midnight. Tell them if they are not there in 30 minutes. They can look for employment at Sterling Aviation." "Understood," Marcus said. He didn't blink. He began typing furiously. We touched down on the private helipad of the Whitfield Tower in Midtown Manhattan just as the clock struck midnight. The city was alive below us, a grid of golden arteries pumping energy into the night. This was my kingdom. I stepped off the chopper and walked straight to the private elevator. As the doors closed, sealing me in the quiet luxury of the lift, I caught my reflection in the polished steel walls. The girl in the $80 dress was gone. The woman looking back at me was a shark smelling blood in the water. When the elevator doors opened into my penthouse, the transformation was complete. I kicked off the sensible heels and walked barefoot across the heated marble floors. "Coffee, black, and get me the portfolio on Vanguard Shadow," I called out to the empty room. Knowing my house staff was listening, by 2 a.m, the main conference room of my penthouse was a hive of activity. My top 5 executives sat around the glass table, looking disheveled but alert. They were the best legal and financial minds in the country, and I paid them enough to ensure they didn't mind waking up in the middle of the night to destroy a billionaire. I stood at the head of the table, projecting the financial schematics of Sterling Aviation onto the wall-sized screen. "Talk to me," I said, leaning against the mahogany edge of the table. "How bad is it?" David, my chief financial officer, adjusted his glasses. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "It is worse than bad. Sally, it is terminal. Raymond Sterling has been running a Ponzi scheme with wings for the last 5 years. He pointed to a red line plummeting on the graph. "He is leveraged at 400%. He has borrowed against the fleet, against the hangars, even against the future ticket sales. He is bleeding cash at a rate of $3 million a week." "How is he still flying?" I asked. Creative accounting. Sarah, my general counsel, chimed in. She tossed a thick file onto the table. "He is moving debt between shell companies to hide the losses from the shareholders. It is illegal. It is reckless. And it is about to collapse. He has a loan payment of $50 million due to the Bank of Geneva in 72 hours. He doesn't have the liquidity to pay for it." I smiled. It was a cold, humorless smile. "So he is desperate." "Desperate is an understatement," David said. "He is drowning, but—" He hesitated, tapping a key on his laptop to bring up a new document. "He thinks he has a lifeline." "Explain," I said. "We intercepted some internal communications," David continued. "Raymond has been in secret talks with a private equity firm called Vanguard Shadow. He believes they are going to inject $200 million of capital into Sterling Aviation in exchange for a 30% stake. He is banking everything on this deal. He has told his board that the papers are being drawn up as we speak. That money is the only thing keeping the creditors from seizing his planes." The room went quiet. My team looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the skyline. The Empire State Building was lit up in white, standing tall and unyielding. "Vanguard Shadow." I repeated the name softly. I turned back to the room. "David, who owns Vanguard Shadow?" David looked at his screen, then looked up at me, a slow realization dawning on his face. He checked the registration data, tracing the ownership through the maze of holding companies in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. "It is a blind trust," David said, his voice dropping. "Parent company Oceanic Core." A ripple of shock went through the room. "You own it," Sarah whispered. "I own it," I confirmed. I had set up Vanguard Shadow 3 years ago as a vehicle to acquire distressed assets anonymously. I had forgotten it was even on the radar for an aviation deal. My acquisitions team must have flagged Sterling Aviation as a potential target months ago, purely based on the numbers, without ever realizing the personal connection. Raymond Sterling had spent the entire dinner calling me trash. He had humiliated me, mocked my poverty, and dismissed me as a gutter rat. And all the while, he was praying to a faceless god named Vanguard Shadow to save his legacy. He was praying to me. I laughed. It started as a low chuckle and built into a full, resonant sound that echoed off the glass walls. It was the irony of the century. The man who wouldn't let me eat at his table was begging to eat from my hand. "He thinks Vanguard Shadow is his savior," I said. Walking back to the head of the table, I placed my palms flat on the cool glass surface, leaning in toward my team. "He thinks he is getting a $200 million check to wipe away his incompetence." "What do you want to do?" David asked. "Do we kill the deal if Vanguard pulls out? He declares bankruptcy by Monday." "No," I said instantly. "Bankruptcy is too easy. Bankruptcy protects him. If he goes bankrupt, the courts take over. He gets to retire to his beach house while the lawyers fight over the scraps. I shook my head. I don't want him protected. I want him exposed. I want him to feel the ground crumble beneath his feet 1 inch at a time. I looked at Marcus. Get me the contract for the Vanguard deal, the one Raymond is waiting for. Marcus tapped his tablet, and the document appeared on the main screen. It was a standard bailout agreement. Redraft it, I ordered. Change the terms. We are not offering a capital injection for equity anymore. Vanguard Shadow is going to purchase the debt. The debt? Sarah asked, her eyebrows shooting up. All of it. Every cent, I said. Contact the Bank of Geneva, contact the fuel suppliers, contact the maintenance unions, buy their promissory notes. Offer them 100 cents on the dollar if they sell to us by noon today. Tell them there is a liquidity crisis coming and this is their only chance to cash out. That will cost nearly $400 million, David calculated rapidly. Sally, that is a massive risk for a failing airline. I am not buying the airline for profit. David, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, I am buying the right to foreclose. I paced the length of the room. By noon tomorrow, I want to be the single largest creditor of Sterling Aviation. I want to own every drop of fuel in their tanks and every bolt in their fuselages. And once we own the debt, we control the timeline. And the Vanguard meeting? Marcus asked. Raymond keeps calling the Vanguard representative, demanding to sign the papers. Let him wait, I said. Let him sweat. Tell him the partners at Vanguard are reviewing the due diligence. Tell him there is a discrepancy in the character assessment of the leadership. I looked at the image of Raymond Sterling on the screen. It was a press photo, airbrushed to make him look noble and visionary. He called me trash, I said to the room. So, let's take out the garbage, I turned to Sarah. Draft a letter from Vanguard Shadow to Raymond Sterling. Keep it vague. Tell him the investors have concerns about the operational stability of the company given recent rumors. Make him panic. When he panics, he makes mistakes. And Julian? Marcus asked quietly. I paused. The image of Julian staring at his napkin, too cowardly to meet my eyes, flashed in my mind. Leave him, I said. He is not the target. He is just collateral damage. If he is smart, he will run. If he is his father's son, he will go down with the ship. I looked at the clock. It was 3:30 in the morning. Get to work, I told them. I want to have him for breakfast. As the team scrambled to execute the orders, phones ringing and keyboards clacking, I walked back to the window. The city lights were blurring as the first hint of gray touched the eastern horizon. 48 hours. That was all I needed. Raymond Sterling had built his life on the belief that some people were born to rule and others were born to serve. He believed that bloodlines determined destiny. He was about to learn a very modern lesson in economics in the free market. Blood doesn't matter. Capital is king. And the queen was coming for his head. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the narrative had already been written, polished, and served to the public on a silver platter. I sat in my office on the 45th floor of the Oceanic Core Tower, sipping a cup of green tea, watching the cable news cycle devour my reputation. The headline on the screen screamed in bold red letters, "Billionaire heir dumps gold digger at engagement gala." Raymond Sterling had been busy. He had spun the events of the previous night with the skill of a seasoned manipulator, according to the anonymous sources close to the family. I had demanded a prenuptial agreement guaranteeing me $50 million, and when Julian refused, I had thrown a tantrum and stormed out. They painted me as a desperate climber from the slums who had tried to hustle the noble Sterling family and failed. I watched a pundit discuss my suspect background and my predatory nature. I didn't feel angry. I felt the cold satisfaction of a hunter watching a trap being set. Raymond was using the media to shield his company. He needed to project strength. He needed the world to believe that the chaos at the dinner was a personal drama, not a symptom of a collapsing empire, on the stock market ticker running at the bottom of the screen. Sterling Aviation was trading down 3%. It was a wobble, not a crash. The market was nervous, but Raymond had issued a press release at dawn, assuring shareholders that a strategic partnership with a major institutional investor was imminent. He named Vanguard Shadow as the partner. He was using my money he didn't have yet, to prop up his stock price. It was securities fraud. Plain and simple. "Marcus," I said, not turning away from the window. "It is time to pull the rug." Marcus stood by the door, a tablet in hand. "The press release from Vanguard Shadow is ready. Ms. Whitfield, shall I deploy it?" "Send it," I said. "But send it directly to Raymond's chief financial officer first. I want them to sweat before the market opens fully." The message was brief and devastatingly vague. It stated that Vanguard Shadow had uncovered inconsistencies in the operational projections of Sterling Aviation and required an immediate halt to the signing process to conduct enhanced due diligence. In the language of mergers and acquisitions, enhanced due diligence at the 11th hour was code for "We found a dead body in the trunk and we are about to walk away." I could almost hear the scream echo from the Sterling headquarters across town. In my mind's eye, I saw Raymond. He would be in his office, the one with the mahogany panels and the portraits of his ancestors. He would be purple with rage. He would be screaming at his accountants, throwing files, blaming some low-level analyst for not cooking the books well enough. He would be terrified, but his arrogance would not let him believe the deal was dead. He would think it was a negotiation tactic. He would think he could charm or bully his way out of it. "He is calling," Marcus noted, glancing at the encrypted line we had set up for the Vanguard persona. 5 times in the last 2 minutes. "Let it ring," I said. "Let him stew in his own panic. Now, let's move to Phase 2. What is the status of the short-term debt?" "We have identified 7 regional banks holding Sterling's operational loans," Marcus reported. "These are short-term notes, mostly for payroll and maintenance. High interest, high risk. The total value is roughly $80 million. "Buy them," I ordered. "Offer the banks 110 cents on the dollar. Tell them we are an aggressive debt collection agency looking to diversify. They will be happy to offload the risk." Over the next 3 hours, my team executed a silent, bloodless coup. We contacted small banks in Ohio, Delaware, and New Jersey. These institutions were already nervous about Sterling's credit rating, when an anonymous buyer appeared offering to pay them more than the debt was worth just to take it off their hands. They didn't ask questions. They signed. By lunch, I was no longer just the woman Raymond had kicked out of his house. I was the owner of his payroll. I held the mortgage on his maintenance hangars. I owned the paper that allowed him to keep the lights on, while I tightened the noose around the father's neck. The sun was finally beginning to wake up. I had a surveillance notification set for my old apartment in Queens. It was a small, walk-up unit I had rented solely to maintain the illusion of being a working-class girl. It was sparsely furnished with items from a rental center. At 1 in the afternoon, the sensor on the front door triggered Julian. I switched the monitor to the feed from the hidden camera in the living room. Julian stood in the center of the small, dusty space. He looked exhausted. His suit was rumpled, likely the same one he had worn to the dinner. He was looking for me. He was looking for Sally, the girl who liked Thai takeout and cheap wine. But the apartment was empty. I had sent a cleaning crew in at 4 in the morning. The rental furniture was gone. The clothes were gone. The photos of us on the fridge were gone. The apartment was completely bare, stripped down to the peeling paint and the bare floorboards. It looked as if no one had lived there for years. Julian walked into the bedroom. Empty. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He opened the closet door, expecting to see my coats, but found only a wire hanger swinging on the rod. He spun around, confusion warping his features. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number again. The call went straight to the disconnected message. He went to the window and looked out at the street. He looked lost, for the first time. Reality was hitting him. The Sally he knew wasn't just gone. She had been erased. The woman who had cooked him dinner and listened to him complain about his father for 2 years had vanished without a trace. He walked over to the kitchen counter. There was a single envelope left there. I had instructed the cleaners to leave it. It was the final bill for the furniture rental, addressed to a shell corporation, not to Sally Whitfield. Julian picked it up. He read the name on the invoice. O.C. Holdings. He frowned. He didn't know what it meant yet, but the seed of doubt was planted. He was realizing that he didn't know the woman he had asked to marry him. He was realizing that while he was playing house, I was playing a much longer game. He crumpled the paper in his fist and sank to the floor. Sitting in the middle of the empty room, I turned off the monitor. I couldn't afford to feel pity for him. Not yet. He had made his choice at the dinner table. Ms. Whitfield, Marcus interrupted, his voice urgent. We have a situation, an opportunity. Sterling Aviation has a VIP charter scheduled for 4 o'clock this afternoon. Flight 808 to Washington, D.C. I raised an eyebrow. Who is on board? Senator Gibson and 3 members of the Transportation Committee, Marcus said. They are key allies of Raymond. He is flying them down for a fundraising gala. He needs their support to block an environmental regulation that would cost him millions. I smiled. It was perfect. Raymond was trying to use his planes to buy political favor at the exact moment he couldn't afford to fly them. Check the fuel status, I said. The aircraft is at Teterboro Airport, Marcus replied. It is scheduled for refueling at 2:30. Oceanic Corps didn't just ship containers across the ocean. We owned the fuel logistics for the entire tri-state area. We supplied the tankers that supplied the airports. Every drop of jet fuel that went into a plane at Teterboro passed through my supply chain. Cut them off, I said. The command was simple, but the implications were nuclear. Under what justification? Marcus asked, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Credit hold, I said. Flag their account as delinquent. We just bought their debt from the regional banks, which triggered a cross-default clause in their fuel contracts. Technically, they are insolvent. Do not pump a single gallon of Jet A into that plane. At 2:30, the fuel truck pulled up to the sleek Gulfstream jet emblazoned with the Sterling logo. The pilot was doing his pre-flight checks. The senator's limousine was already pulling onto the tarmac, but the truck didn't hook up. The driver checked his handheld device, frowned, and spoke to the pilot. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the conversation. The driver showed the service denied screen. The pilot argued. The driver shrugged. He was just following orders from the system. At 3 o'clock, Raymond received the call. I could picture the blood draining from his face. It was one thing to have financial trouble in private. It was another thing entirely to strand a United States senator on the tarmac because you couldn't pay for gas. The news broke 40 minutes later. Senator Gibson tweeted, Stuck at Teterboro, Sterling Aviation flight canceled due to technical difficulties, unacceptable reliability. We'll be looking into their safety protocols. The tweet went viral instantly. Technical difficulties was airline code for something is broken. But in the industry, word traveled fast. The ground crews knew. The other pilots knew. The rumor started whispering through the terminals and then shouted across the financial forums, Sterling didn't have gas money. The stock price, which had been wobbling, suddenly fell off a cliff. It dropped 8% in 10 minutes. Raymond was on the phone again, screaming at the airport manager, screaming at the fuel company. He demanded to speak to the CEO of the logistics provider. He demanded to speak to Oceanic Corps. He is on line 1, the receptionist messaged me. He is demanding to speak to the director of operations. I picked up the phone. I didn't use a voice modulator. I didn't need to. He wouldn't recognize the voice of the trash he had discarded in the voice of the executioner. This is operations, I said coolly. This is Raymond Sterling, he bellowed. Do you know who I am? Your driver is refusing to fuel my aircraft. I have a senator sitting in the lounge. I want that truck hookup now, or I will sue your miserable company into the Stone Age. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dripping with professional indifference. I am looking at your account. It seems there is a credit hold due to outstanding liabilities. Our system automatically locks distribution when the risk profile exceeds the deposit. Outstanding liabilities. I have perfect credit. He lied. This is a glitch. Override it, I will pay double. I cannot override the system, sir, I said. And we do not accept personal checks. You are currently in default on your master service agreement. Until the balance is cleared via wire transfer, which will take 24 hours to process, no fuel will be dispensed. 24 hours, he choked. I don't have 24 hours, I have an election to buy, a gala to attend. Then might I suggest a commercial flight? I said. I believe Delta has a departure at 5. Economy class is quite affordable. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. The insult was so precise, so targeted. Who is this? Raymond whispered. Who am I speaking to? Someone who follows the rules. Mr. Sterling. I said, have a nice day. I hung up. On the screen, the stock dropped another 4%. The senator had just posted a photo of himself boarding a competitor's plane. The first crack had appeared in the dam. The water was rushing in, and Raymond was still looking for a leak, not realizing he was already underwater. I looked at the clock. It was 5 p.m. Marcus, I said, prepare the legal team. Tomorrow we go for the kill. I want the foreclosure papers ready by breakfast. The dinner was over, the hunt was on, and the prey was already limping. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition, from my command center on the top floor of the Oceanic Core building. I watched the structural integrity of Sterling Aviation disintegrate in real time. It was like watching a controlled avalanche. One stone moved, and the entire mountainside came crashing down. The chaos began with the pilots. News of the fuel credit hold had spread through the union like wildfire. Pilots are a pragmatic breed. They do not fly if they think the company cannot cover their insurance or their layover hotels. By 10 a.m. on the second day, 60% of the Sterling fleet was grounded. The departure boards at JFK LaGuardia and Newark were a sea of red text reading "canceled." Then came the suppliers. My acquisition of the short-term debt had triggered automatic clauses in their vendor contracts. The catering company that provided the champagne and caviar for Raymond's first-class passengers filed a lien against the company assets. The maintenance crews, realizing their invoices were 90 days overdue, walked off the job, leaving half-assembled engines sitting on the hangar floors. I stood before the wall of monitors, a cup of black coffee in my hand, watching the news feed. A reporter was standing outside the Sterling headquarters, shouting over the noise of angry passengers demanding refunds. "It is absolute bedlam here," the reporter yelled into her microphone. "Rumors of bankruptcy are swirling, and CEO Raymond Sterling has yet to make a public statement." But I knew exactly what Raymond was doing. I had tapped into the internal security cameras of his executive suite 3 hours ago. It was illegal, certainly, but moral ambiguity was a luxury I had discarded the moment he called me trash. On the grainy black and white feed, Raymond looked like a trapped animal. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. He was pacing back and forth across his Persian rug, shouting into a telephone. "Get me Senator Holloway," Raymond screamed. "I don't care if he is in session. I funded his entire re-election campaign. Get him on the line now." I watched as he slammed the receiver down and waited. He was counting on the old boy network. He believed that a few handshakes and some dark money donations would buy him a federal bailout or at least a regulatory pause. The phone rang. Raymond snatched it up, his face transforming into a mask of desperate charm. "Senator, thank God. Look, Jim, I am in a bit of a tight spot with the unions. I need you to make a call to the FAA. Tell them this is a national security issue. Tell them—" He stopped. His face went slack. I could only imagine the voice on the other end. Senator Holloway was a survivor. He could smell the stench of failure from Washington, D.C. He wasn't going to tie his political career to a sinking ship. "What do you mean, you can't get involved?" Raymond's voice rose to a shriek. "I own you. Jim, I have the receipts. Don't you dare hang up on me." He stared at the phone in disbelief, then hurled it across the room. It smashed into a framed picture of himself shaking hands with the president, shattering the glass. The political shield was gone. "Status on cash flow?" I asked, turning to Marcus. "The freeze is absolute," Marcus replied. "We just received confirmation from the Bank of Geneva. They have classified Sterling Aviation as a high-risk entity due to governance instability. All lines of credit are locked. Their corporate cards are being declined at gas stations. They cannot even buy paper clips right now." "Excellent," I said. "Now, tighten the screws." On the monitor, the door to Raymond's office burst open. It wasn't a creditor or a lawyer. It was Julian. My heart gave a traitorous little jump, but I forced it back down. Julian looked terrible. He hadn't shaved, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He walked into the room with a purpose I hadn't seen in him before. I turned up the volume on the surveillance feed. "We need to talk," Julian said, his voice shaking slightly but loud enough to cut through Raymond's panic. Raymond spun around, his eyes wild. "Not now. Julian, can't you see I am trying to save your inheritance? The whole world is conspiring against us." "The world isn't conspiring, Dad," Julian said, stepping over the shattered glass of the picture frame. "You did this. You treated people like dirt for 40 years, and now it is coming back to haunt us." "I did what was necessary," Raymond roared. "I built this empire. I made you a prince." "You made me a coward," Julian shouted back. "At that dinner, the way you spoke to Sally, it was vile. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and you treated her like she was subhuman just because she didn't have a trust fund." Raymond's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "Are we still talking about that waitress, that gold digger?" "She wasn't a gold digger," Julian said. "She loved me, and I let you drive her away because I was too scared to stand up to you. Well, I am done being scared. I went to her apartment today. She is gone. Dad, she erased herself, and I blame you." Julian took a step closer to his father. "You are going to apologize. You are going to find her, and you are going to apologize." Raymond laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "Apologize to the help. You are pathetic. Julian, soft, just like your mother," without warning. Raymond stepped forward and swung his hand. The slap echoed through the speakers in my war room. It was a vicious, backhanded strike that sent Julian stumbling into the bookshelf. "You will not mention that trash in my office again," Raymond hissed, standing over his son. "You want to be a man. Then fix this mess. Go down to the lobby and tell the press that everything is fine. Lie to them. That is what Sterling does." Julian held his cheek, staring up at his father with a look of pure horror. It wasn't the pain of the blow. It was the shattering of the last illusion. He finally saw Raymond not as a demanding patriarch, but as a monster. Julian didn't say a word. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and walked out of the office. But he didn't go to the lobby. I switched camera feeds and watched him walk down the hall to his own small office. He locked the door and sat in the dark, staring at the wall. "He is breaking," Marcus observed quietly beside me. "Good," I said, though my voice lacked its usual steel. "He needs to break to be rebuilt." I turned my attention back to the main screen. Raymond was alone again, and the reality of the cash freeze was setting in. He went to his safe, spun the dial, and pulled out a thick ledger. It wasn't the official digital record. It was a physical black book, the real numbers. He opened it, scanning the columns, sweating profusely. He grabbed his cell phone, the only line of communication he had left, and dialed a number I knew by heart. My secure line rang. It was the Vanguard Shadow priority line. "Put it on speaker," I signaled Marcus. "This is Vanguard Acquisitions," Marcus answered, his voice smooth and professional. "This is Raymond Sterling." Raymond gasped. "I need to speak to my partners. Now." "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said calmly, "we have received disturbing reports about your liquidity. The board is considering pulling the offer." No, you can't do that," Raymond pleaded, his voice cracking. Listen, it is all a misunderstanding, a smear campaign by my competitors. The fundamentals are strong, I have the data right here, I can prove it. Our analysts are skeptical, Marcus said. The due diligence process usually takes weeks. I don't have weeks, Raymond shouted. I can bring the books to you. Tonight, I will show you the real projections, the ones the market doesn't see. We are sitting on a gold mine. I swear. I nodded to Marcus. It was time to reel him in. Very well, Mr. Sterling, Marcus said. If you believe the data can exonerate you, the partners are willing to meet, but not at your offices. Given the circus outside your building, we require privacy. Anywhere, Raymond said. Name the place. The Oceanic Core Tower, Marcus said. Penthouse Conference Suite. Tonight at 9 o'clock. Bring everything. And Mr. Sterling, this is your only chance. Oceanic Core. Raymond paused. Why there? They are a shipping company. Oceanic Core is the parent company of Vanguard Shadow. Marcus lied smoothly, or rather, revealed a truth that Raymond was too desperate to analyze. We use their facilities for high-level negotiations. Fine, Raymond said. I will be there. I will bring the papers. You will see. It is all a mistake. He hung up. On the screen, I watched Raymond scramble. He opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of fresh documents. He began frantically typing on his computer, printing out pages, shredding others. He was doctoring the P&L statements. He was creating a fantasy world where Sterling Aviation was profitable, erasing the debts I already owned. He was preparing to commit felony fraud in front of the very person who held the original receipts. He is digging his own grave, I said. And Julian? Marcus asked. He is still in the building. I switched back to Julian's camera feed. He was still sitting in the dark office, but he wasn't staring at the wall anymore. He was rummaging through an old filing cabinet in the corner of the room. It was Raymond's old storage unit, filled with decades of forgotten paperwork. Julian pulled out a dusty box labeled 2015, Government Contracts. He began flipping through the files, perhaps looking for something to save the company, or perhaps looking for ammunition. Suddenly, he stopped. He pulled out a photograph clipped to a handwritten ledger. I zoomed in on the camera feed. The resolution was grainy, but the image was clear enough. It was a photo taken at a private marina. It showed Raymond Sterling handing a thick brown envelope to a man in a windbreaker. The man was recognizable instantly to anyone who followed New York politics. It was Councilman DeMarco, who had been indicted 5 years ago for taking bribes to overlook safety violations. Julian held the photo with trembling hands. He read the note attached to it. Insurance payment for the 737 inspection bypass. My breath caught in my throat. I knew Raymond was corrupt, but I didn't know he had bypassed safety inspections on the passenger jets. This wasn't just financial fraud anymore. This was endangering human lives. Julian stared at the photo. He looked at the door where his father was frantically forging documents to save his own skin. Then he looked at the shredder in the corner of the room. He stood at a crossroads. He could destroy the photo, burn the evidence, and protect the family name, or he could burn the family down to save his soul. I watched, mesmerized. Julian stood up. He walked toward the shredder. My stomach tightened. If he destroyed it, he was just like Raymond. He held the photo over the teeth of the machine. The motor hummed. Then, he stopped. He pulled the photo back. He walked back to his desk, opened his briefcase, and placed the photo inside. He snapped the lock shut. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He kept it, Marcus said, sounding surprised. He is keeping it, I corrected. But the question is, what will he do with it? On the other screen, Raymond was stuffing his forged documents into a leather portfolio. He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusted his tie, and practiced his winning smile. He looked like a man ready to sell ice to an Eskimo. Prepare the boardroom, I told Marcus, and make sure the lighting is dramatic. I want him to feel small when he walks in. And the Julian variable? Marcus asked. Let him come, I said. Send a secure message to Julian's personal email, the one his father doesn't monitor. Tell him that if he wants to know the truth about the trash he was engaged to, he should come to the Oceanic Core Tower at 9 o'clock. Tell him to bring the briefcase. Marcus's fingers flew across the tablet. Message sent. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the skyscrapers. The game was entering its final phase. The prey was coming to the hunter's den, thinking he was the guest of honor. Raymond Sterling was coming to negotiate a deal with Vanguard Shadow. He had no idea he was walking into a courtroom where I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The silence in Julian's office was heavy, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the chaotic shouting coming from his father's suite down the hall. I watched him on the high-definition monitor in my war room. A ghost in his own life. He wasn't looking at the family photos on his desk anymore. He was staring at a blank spot on the wall, his mind clearly replaying a reel of memories that no longer made sense. I could almost hear his thoughts. He was remembering the times I had accidentally fixed his spreadsheet formulas when he brought work home. He was recalling how I, a simple warehouse manager, had casually explained the intricacies of maritime law during a movie night, claiming I had read it in a pamphlet. The pieces of the puzzle were floating in front of him. My sudden disappearances, my lack of family history, the way I never seemed impressed by his wealth, but he couldn't quite force them together. He picked up his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed a number. It wasn't mine. It was a private investigator he had used once before to check on a rival executive. "It is me," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "I need you to find someone. Sally Whitfield. The social security number ends in 4592. She vanished." I leaned back in my chair, sipping my lukewarm coffee. "Go ahead." "Julian, dig." 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Julian put it on speaker, and the detective's voice filled his small office, picked up clearly by the bug I had planted in his lamp months ago. "Mr. Sterling, are you sure about that name?" the detective asked, sounding perplexed. "Yes, I am sure," Julian snapped. "I was engaged to her." "Well, she doesn't exist," the detective said bluntly. "The social security number belongs to a woman who died in 1998. There is no employment record for Sally Whitfield at any logistics firm in the tri-state area. No credit history, no rental agreements. The address you gave me for her apartment, it is owned by a holding company called Blue Horizon Properties. It has been listed as vacant for 3 years. Julian dropped the phone on the desk. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "That is impossible. I lived there. I slept there." "You were sleeping in a ghost town." "Mr. Sterling," the detective said, "whoever this woman is, she is a professional. She scrubbed her footprint cleaner than anyone I've ever seen. She isn't just gone, sir. She was never really there." Julian ended the call. He sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of his mahogany desk until his knuckles turned white. The realization was washing over him, cold and terrifying. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a poor girl who got her heart broken. I was a phantom. He stood up, abruptly, knocking his chair over. He didn't pick it up. He walked to the filing cabinet where he had found the incriminating photo earlier. He needed to know why. Why would someone fake an entire life just to be near him? Or was it to be near his father? He began pulling files with a frantic energy I had never seen in him. He wasn't looking for salvation anymore. He was looking for the rot. He pulled the ledgers for the employee pension fund. He pulled the tax returns for the last 5 years. He spread them out on the floor, sitting cross-legged in his expensive suit, tearing through the pages like a man possessed. I watched him trace the lines of numbers with his finger. He was an unremarkable businessman, but he wasn't stupid. He saw the pattern. "He stole it," Julian whispered to the empty room. "He stole it all." He found the transfer orders. Raymond hadn't just mismanaged the company. He had gutted it. Every time the pilots agreed to a pay cut to save the airline, Raymond had wired $2 million to a numbered account in Zurich. Every time they deferred maintenance on the engines, Raymond bought another property in the Cayman Islands, the pension fund, the retirement money for 3,000 mechanics. Flight attendants and gate agents was empty. It was a hollow shell, rated to pay for Raymond's vintage wine collection and his silence money to politicians. Julian looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked at the door to his father's office. He could hear Raymond laughing now, probably bragging to his mistress on a burner phone about how he was going to charm the investors from Vanguard's shadow. "He is going to let them starve," Julian murmured. "He is going to let the company crash, fire everyone, and walk away with $50 million. For the first time in his life, Julian Sterling stopped being a son. He stopped being the heir. He looked at the photo of the bribe, then at the empty pension ledgers. He realized that his inheritance wasn't money. His inheritance was a crime scene. He stood up and walked to his computer. He didn't hesitate. He plugged in an encrypted external hard drive. He began copying everything: the bribe photos, the scanned ledgers, the emails where Raymond mocked the safety inspectors, the secret recordings of board meetings where they discussed covering up fuel leaks. The progress bar on the screen crawled forward: 10%, 30%, 60%. This was the Julian I had hoped existed beneath the layers of privilege and fear. This was the man who had once told me he wanted to be a teacher, before his father beat that dream out of him. He was finally fighting back. Not with fists, but with the truth. As the download hit 99%, his computer chimed with a new email notification. It popped up in the corner of his screen. Sender unknown subject. The lifeboat. Julian froze. He clicked the email open. I had written it 10 minutes ago, timing it for this exact moment of realization. "Julian, you have found the rot. Now you have a choice. You can let the ship sink and drown with the captain, or you can help me save the passengers. If you want to salvage your name, not the Sterling name, but your own, bring that drive to the Oceanic Core Tower at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Come to the penthouse. Do not tell your father. P.S. The blue tie looks better on you than the red one." Julian stared at the screen, his breath hitching. He looked down at his chest. He was wearing a red tie. He looked around the room, scanning the ceiling, the lamps, and the bookshelf. He realized he was being watched. He didn't panic. Instead, he reached up and loosened the red tie, pulling it off his neck and dropping it into the trash can. He looked directly into the camera hidden in the smoke detector, his eyes meeting mine across the digital divide. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. "I am coming." He pulled the hard drive out of the computer and slipped it into his inside pocket. Right next to his heart, down the hall, Raymond's door opened. The patriarch stepped out, looking refreshed and manic. He had his deal-closing suit on, a pinstriped Navy number that cost more than a car. "Julian," Raymond shouted, clapping his hands. "Cheer up, boy, I have fixed it. I have a meeting tomorrow morning with Vanguard Shadow. I am going to sell them a story so good they will be thanking me for taking their money. We are going to be rich again by noon." Julian stepped out of his office. He looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw the small, pathetic man behind the bluster. "That is great, Dad," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of the usual nervous tremor. "Good luck with the meeting." "You are coming with me, of course," Raymond said, adjusting his cufflinks. "I need you to hold the charts and nod when I speak. Try not to look so morose. Winner's smile. Julian." "I will be there," Julian said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Raymond didn't notice the change in his son's tone. He was too busy admiring his own reflection in the hallway mirror. "That is the spirit. Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we remind the world who the Sterlings are." "Yes," Julian said softly as Raymond walked away. "We certainly will." I turned off the monitor in my war room. The pieces were all in position. The trap was set. The bait was taken. And the inside man had just switched sides. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline, somewhere out there. Julian was driving home alone, the weight of his family's sins sitting in his pocket. He was terrified, I knew, but he was also awake. Tomorrow morning. Raymond thought he was walking into a negotiation. He didn't know he was walking into an execution, and the person pulling the lever wouldn't just be me, it would be his own son. "Marcus," I called out. "Yes, Ms. Whitfield." "Make sure the conference room is ready," I said, "and set 3 places at the table, 1 for me, 1 for the defendant, and 1 for the witness." The game was over. Now, it was time for justice. The Oceanic Core Tower did not look like a place where mercy was dispensed. It stood on the edge of the Hudson Yards, a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. It was 70 stories of pure, unadulterated capitalism, designed to intimidate anyone who stood at its base and looked up. At 8:45 in the morning, Raymond Sterling's limousine pulled up to the curb. From my vantage point on the top floor, watching the security feeds, the car looked like a toy. Raymond stepped out, flanked by 3 of his most expensive corporate attorneys. They adjusted their ties and smoothed their jackets, trying to project confidence, but their body language gave them away. They were nervous. They were entering the belly of the beast, and they knew it. I watched Raymond look up at the building. For a split second, his jaw went slack. He was used to the old world of business, the oak-paneled clubs of the Upper East Side, the limestone townhouses, the soft, warm lighting of spaces built a century ago. Oceanic Core was none of that. It had sharp angles, cold surfaces, and silent, terrifying efficiency. "Bring them up," I said into my headset. "But take the long way. I want them to see the hive before they meet the queen." Marcus, standing beside me in the command center, nodded and relayed the order to the security team in the lobby. I watched on the monitors as Raymond and his team were processed. There was no friendly receptionist to greet them. Instead, they were directed to a bank of biometric scanners. I saw Raymond arguing with a security guard, gesturing wildly. He was offended that he, a Sterling, had to scan his identification like a common visitor. The guard remained impassive, pointing to the scanner. Raymond eventually complied, jamming his hand onto the sensor with a scowl. They were led through the main trading floor. I had designed this space to be overwhelming. It was a cavernous room filled with 300 analysts and traders, surrounded by walls of data screens that moved faster than the human eye could follow. The noise was a low, constant hum of billions of dollars moving across borders in real time. Raymond walked through it, clutching his briefcase, looking like a man from the era of steam engines who had suddenly been dropped onto the bridge of a starship. He looked small. They were not brought to my office. They were escorted to Conference Room Alpha, a space I affectionately called the fishbowl. It was a glass box suspended in the center of the atrium on the 60th floor. The walls were floor-to-ceiling transparent glass. There was nowhere to hide. Anyone walking by could see inside, but the soundproofing was absolute. Once the door closed, you were cut off from the world. Raymond and his lawyers entered. The door hissed shut behind them. I checked the time. It was 8:55. "Let them wait," I ordered. "Set the thermostat to 68 degrees. Cold enough to be uncomfortable, not cold enough to complain." I turned away from the screen. "Where is the other guest?" "Julian is at the South Service entrance," Marcus replied. "He followed instructions. No one saw him enter." "Bring him to the observation deck," I said. "He needs to see this." I walked over to the mirror in my private suite. The reflection staring back at me was a stranger to the woman who had sat at Raymond's dinner table 48 hours ago. That woman had worn soft colors and modest cuts to blend in. Today, I was dressed for war. I wore a bespoke suit from a designer in Milan who didn't sell to the public. It was midnight blue, tailored to a razor's edge. The fabric absorbed the light. My hair, usually worn loose, was pulled back into a severe, intricate knot. I wore no jewelry except for a simple, platinum watch that cost more than Raymond's car. My makeup was sharp lips painted a deep crimson, eyes accentuated to look piercing. I looked like money, not the old, stagnant money of the Sterlings, but new, aggressive, lethal money. "He is in position," Marcus said. I walked out of my suite and down the private corridor to the observation deck. It was a darkened room adjacent to the fishbowl, separated by a pane of one-way glass. Julian was standing there, his hands in his pockets, staring through the glass. He jumped slightly when I entered, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't take his eyes off the scene in front of him. Inside the glass room, Raymond was pacing. He had been waiting for 20 minutes now. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds. He was yelling at his lawyers, pointing fingers. His face flushed, but we couldn't hear him. We just saw the pantomime of his rage. "He looks terrified," Julian said softly. I stood beside him, maintaining a professional distance. "He is terrified. He is realizing that he is not the most powerful person in the room anymore. That is a hard lesson for a man like him." Julian turned to look at me. His eyes widened slightly as he took in my appearance. He scanned the suit, the hair, the cold aura of authority. "Sally," he whispered. It was a question, as if he wasn't sure I was the same human being he had proposed to. "Hello, Julian," I said calmly. "Thank you for coming." "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Really, who are you?" "I am the person who is going to save you from your father's mistakes," I said. "If you let me." I nodded toward the glass. Raymond had stopped pacing. He was sitting at the table now, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked defeated, small, and pathetic. "He lied to me," Julian said, his voice hardening. "I looked at the files, the pension fund, the safety inspections. He lied about everything." "He did," I confirmed. "And in 10 minutes, he is going to try to lie to Vanguard Shadow. He is going to present forged documents to try and secure a bailout. If he signs that contract with those fraudulent numbers, he goes to prison for 20 years. Julian looked down at his chest. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the hard drive. He held it tightly. "And if I give you this," Julian asked, "then we end it on our terms." I said, "We force him out. We save the company. We save jobs. But Raymond goes down." Julian looked back at his father through the glass. Raymond was now berating a junior lawyer, poking the young man in the chest. Even in his lowest moment, Raymond was a bully. "Do it," Julian said. He placed the hard drive on the console table between us. I didn't smile. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a surgical procedure. "Stay here," I said. "Watch, and when the time comes, I will call for you." I turned and walked out of the observation deck. Marcus was waiting for me in the hallway. Behind him stood my legal team, 10 of the most vicious corporate litigators in New York, all dressed in black. Carrying matching leather binders, they looked like a pack of wolves in human clothing. "It has been an hour," Marcus noted. "He is properly marinated." "Let's go," I said. We moved down the hallway, a phalanx of power. The sound of our footsteps on the marble floor was rhythmic, like a drumbeat. I reached the double glass doors of the fishbowl. I didn't stop. The sensors read my presence, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. The air inside the room was stale with the smell of nervous sweat and old cologne. Raymond was mid-sentence, shouting at his lead attorney. When we walked in, he stopped. He looked up. For a moment, there was silence. Absolute, crushing silence. Raymond stared at me. He blinked. He squinted. His brain was trying to process the visual data, but it was rejecting the conclusion. He saw Sally, the girl he had called trash, but he also saw a woman who radiated more power than he had ever possessed. The cognitive dissonance was too much for him. He fell back on the only defense mechanism he had: arrogance. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. He actually laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Well, well," Raymond said, leaning back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Look who it is. The runaway bride." His lawyers looked confused. They looked from me to Raymond, then back to me. They sensed the danger, but Raymond was too blind to see it. "What are you doing here, Sally?" Raymond asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you realize you made a mistake? Did you come to beg for Julian back, Or, he glanced at the lawyers behind me. Did you get a job here? Are you the new assistant? Did they send you to bring us coffee while we wait for the CEO? He looked at his own lawyers and chuckled. Can you believe the nerve I kick her out of my house? And she follows me to my business meeting. You really are desperate, aren't you? Dear, I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him. I walked past him. I walked straight to the head of the immense glass table, the seat reserved for the chairman. Raymond's smile faltered slightly. Excuse me, what do you think you are doing that is for the owner of Vanguard Shadow? Get out of that chair before I have security throw you out. I sat down. The motion was fluid, practiced, and absolute. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers. I looked at Marcus. Marcus stepped forward. He didn't look at Raymond. He looked at the room at large. Gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly in the acoustic perfection of the glass box. Please take your seats. My 10 lawyers moved as one. They pulled out chairs and sat down, flanking me on both sides. They placed their binders on the table and opened them in unison. The sound of 10 heavy covers hitting the glass was like a gavel striking a block. Raymond stood up, his face turning red. This is a joke. I am here to meet the partners of Vanguard Shadow. Where are they? Who are these people? He pointed a shaking finger at me. And get this trash out of my sight. I finally looked at him. I locked eyes with him, channeling every ounce of cold fury I had suppressed for 2 years. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, letting him feel the weight of his own insignificance. Sit down. Raymond, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the timbre of command. It wasn't a request. Raymond froze. He had never heard me speak like that. He had only heard the soft, deferential voice of the girl who wanted to be liked. This voice was steel. Who do you think you are? He whispered, his bravado crumbling. Marcus cleared his throat. He stepped to the side of my chair, standing at attention like a royal guard. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, his tone formal and icy. It is my distinct privilege to introduce you to the chairwoman of the board. He gestured to me with an open hand. This is Ms. Sally Whitfield, Marcus continued, founder and chief executive officer of Oceanic Core Logistics, majority shareholder of the Global Transit Alliance, and specifically relevant to your presence here today, she is the sole owner and principal investor of Vanguard Shadow. The silence that followed was louder than an explosion. Raymond's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping for air. He looked at me, then at the logo on the wall, then back at me. The color drained from his face so fast, I thought he might pass out. No, he croaked. That is impossible. You are a warehouse manager. You are nobody. I am the warehouse manager, I corrected him, my voice smooth. I manage the warehouse of the world, Raymond, and right now, you are just a piece of damaged inventory sitting on my shelf. His lawyers were terrified. They were frantically whispering to each other, closing their laptops, realizing they had just walked into a trap. You own Vanguard, Raymond stammered. Are you an investor? I am the bank. Raymond, I said. I am the fuel supplier you screamed at yesterday. I am the debt collector who bought your loans this morning. And I am the woman you called trash in front of your friends. I leaned forward slightly. You wanted a meeting with the money you are looking at her. Raymond gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. His legs were shaking. He looked at the glass walls. Realizing that the entire office, the hundreds of people outside, worked for me, he realized that the building he was standing in, which he had felt so intimidated by, was my home. But why? He whispered. Why the charade? Why the cheap clothes? Why Julian? Because I wanted to see if there was anything in your world worth saving, I said. I wanted to know if money was the only thing that made you people human, and you gave me my answer on a silver platter. I reached out and tapped the leather binder in front of me. Now, I said, let's talk about this bailout you are so desperate for. My team tells me you have brought some very interesting financial projections. Please, present them. I am dying to see how you plan to lie to the woman who already owns your ledger." Raymond sank back into his chair. He looked small, he looked broken, but there was still a flicker of rat-like cunning in his eyes. He didn't know about Julian yet. He didn't know about the hard drive. He thought he could still negotiate. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the ghost of his former arrogance. "Well," he said, straightening his tie with a trembling hand, "it seems I have underestimated you. Sally, a fatal error. I admit, but business is business. You bought the debt because you want the airline. You know Sterling Aviation is a gold mine if managed correctly. We can make a deal. We are family. After all." I stared at him, marveling at his delusion. "Family." I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. "We are not family. Raymond, we are barely the same species." I raised a hand, cutting off his next sentence. "Marcus," I said. "Bring in the witness." Raymond frowned. "Witness what witness?" The door to the observation deck opened. Raymond turned around. When he saw Julian walk into the glass room, clutching the hard drive to his chest, the last remaining pillar of Raymond Sterling's world turned to dust. The blood drained from Raymond Sterling's face so rapidly that for a moment, I thought he might suffer a stroke right there in the glass box. His skin, usually flushed with the ruddy complexion of expensive scotch and high blood pressure, turned the color of old parchment. He looked from me to Marcus, then to his own lawyers, his eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that did not exist. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. The great orator, the man who had charmed Wall Street for decades, had been rendered mute by the sheer absurdity of his reality. The woman he had dismissed as a servant was sitting on the throne he had come to beg before. I didn't give him time to recover. I reached for the thick leather binder that sat in front of me, the forensic audit report my team had compiled overnight. It was heavy, filled with 300 pages of his failures. I lifted it and let it drop onto the glass table. Wham! The sound was violent, echoing sharply in the acoustic silence of the room. Raymond flinched physically, his shoulders jerking up as if I had fired a weapon. "I have read your books, Raymond," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "I have read the real books, not the fairy tales you prepared for this meeting." I tapped the binder with a manicured fingernail. "Incompetence," I said. "Negligence, fraud, embezzlement." I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto his. "I believe the word you used at dinner was trash. Well, Raymond, after reviewing your operational history, I can confirm that trash is the only word that accurately describes the way you run this company." Raymond's lawyers looked down at their laps, terrified to make eye contact with anyone. They knew. They had always known. And now they were in the room with the executioner. Raymond, however, was a survivor. His shock began to recede, replaced by a desperate, slimy cunning. He adjusted his jacket, forced a smile onto his face, a grotesque, wavering expression that didn't reach his eyes, and leaned forward. "Sally," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sally, listen to me. I think we have gotten off on the wrong foot." He let out a short, nervous laugh. "You have to understand the pressure I'm under. The things I said at dinner, surely you realized what that was." I raised an eyebrow. "Do enlighten me, Raymond. What was it?" "It was a test," Raymond exclaimed, spreading his hands wide. "A test of character. You know how it is in our world. We cannot just let anyone into the inner circle. We have to push them. We have to break them down to see what they are made of." He pointed at me, nodding vigorously. "And look at you. You passed. I knew there was something special about you. The fire. The steel. You are not a warehouse worker. You are a shark. Just like me. I was just trying to draw it out of you. I was molding you. Sally, you should be thanking me." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He was actually trying to claim credit for my success while simultaneously erasing his own cruelty. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply reached for the remote control on the console table. A test, I repeated flatly. Let's review the exam questions. Shall we? I pressed the button. The large screen on the wall behind me flickered to life. It displayed a waveform audio file. I had recorded the entire dinner on my phone, a habit I had developed in business meetings that I had never dropped. Raymond's voice boomed through the surround sound speakers, clear and high definition. The Sterling house does not tolerate trash. You are an infection. You can warm Julian's bed. Whoredom is a respectable enough profession for someone of your station. The silence that followed the recording was suffocating. The words hung in the air, stripped of the candlelight and the clinking silverware, left naked and ugly in the harsh light of the conference room. Raymond turned red again. He looked at his lawyers, who were now openly staring at him with expressions of distaste. It is one thing to know your client is a jerk. It is another to hear him call a billionaire CEO a whore on tape. That was taken out of context, Raymond mumbled, loosening his tie. I was drunk. It was the wine. It was the truth, Raymond, I said, turning off the screen. It was the only honest thing you have said in years. You despise anyone you think is beneath you. The irony, of course, is that from where I'm sitting, you are the one at the bottom of the food chain. I opened the binder and began to read, my voice calm and methodical. I own the debt you owe to the Bank of Geneva. That is $50 million due yesterday. I own the promissory notes from your fuel suppliers. That is another $12 million. I own the liens on your maintenance hangars in New Jersey and the catering contracts at JFK. I looked up at him. Do you understand the physics of this situation? Raymond, I don't just hold your mortgage. I own the lights, the water, the fuel, and the ground you park your planes on. Technically speaking, I own the chair you are sitting in right now. You are trespassing on my property. Raymond wiped his forehead with his handkerchief. He was sweating profusely now. So what do you want? You want to squeeze me? Fine. You bought the debt. You want a seat on the board. I can give you a seat. We can run this together. With your capital and my experience, we could be unstoppable. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, born of pure disbelief at his audacity. Your experience, I asked. Your experience is what drove this company into the ground. I don't want a partner. Raymond, I don't want a seat on the board. I slid a single sheet of paper across the glass table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. This is a purchase and sale agreement, I said. It outlines the terms of my acquisition of Sterling Aviation. Raymond picked it up, his hands shaking. He scanned the document. His eyes bulged. $1, he screeched. $1. This company is worth billions. This company has $400 million in liabilities and zero cash flow, I countered. The brand is toxic. The fleet is grounded. The staff is on strike. The equity value is zero. Actually, it is negative. I am doing you a favor by taking the debt off your hands. I will not sign this. Raymond slammed the paper down. This is an insult. There are conditions, I continued, ignoring his outburst. Condition 1, I assume all corporate debt. Condition 2, I guarantee the pension fund for all employees. Fully reinstated. Condition 3, no layoffs for the operational staff for 24 months. And me? Raymond asked, his voice trembling with rage. What about me? What is my package? The golden parachute. I leaned back, crossing my legs. Condition 4, I said softly. Raymond Sterling resigns as CEO. Effective immediately. You surrender all voting shares. You receive no severance, no payout, no consulting fee. You leave the building with the personal items in your pockets. And nothing else. Raymond stared at me. The vein in his forehead was throbbing. He stood up, kicking his chair back so hard it nearly tipped over. You think you can fire me? He shouted, spittle flying from his mouth. I am Sterling Aviation. My name is on the tail of every plane. You can't fire me. I will sue you. I will drag you through every court in this country. He pointed a finger at me, shaking with fury. I will go to the press. I will tell them you are a predator. I will tell them you seduced my son to steal my company. I will ruin you." "You can try," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "But you are forgetting something. Raymond, lawsuits require evidence, and public opinion requires credibility. You have neither." "I have the truth," Raymond roared. "I am the victim here." "Are you?" I asked. "Or are you a criminal who has been looting his own company for a decade?" "You have no proof," Raymond yelled. "My books are clean. My lawyers will bury you." I smiled. It was the smile of a chess player who had just moved their queen into the final position. "I don't need to dig for proof, Raymond," I said. "I didn't have to steal your passwords or hack your servers. You see, the problem with treating people like trash is that eventually, the trash talks back." I looked past Raymond, toward the glass doors of the observation deck. "You said you would ruin me," I said. "But you might want to see who is standing next to me before you make that threat." Raymond followed my gaze. He turned around slowly. The door to the observation deck opened. Julian stepped out. He walked into the glass room. He wasn't wearing the red tie anymore. He wasn't slouching. He walked with a heavy, burdened gait, but his head was up. He walked past his father's lawyers, who parted like the Red Sea. He stopped at the edge of the table, standing right next to me. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at his father. Raymond stared at his son. He blinked, confused. For a second, he thought Julian was there to support him. "Julian," Raymond gasped, relief washing over his face. "Thank God. Tell this woman she is insane. Call security. Get these people out of here." Julian didn't move. He didn't reach for his phone. He simply stood there, his hand reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Julian," Raymond asked, his voice wavering. "What are you doing? Help me." "I am helping." "Dad," Julian said. His voice was quiet, sad, and final. "I am helping the only way that matters anymore." He pulled out the black hard drive. He placed it gently on the glass table, right on top of the $1 contract. "The game is over, Dad," Julian said. The silence in the glass-walled conference room was so profound that I could hear the hum of the hard drive spinning on the table. It was a small, black rectangle, no bigger than a deck of cards, yet it contained enough radioactive material to turn the sterling legacy into ash. Raymond stared at the device, then up at his son. His brain was misfiring, desperately trying to cling to the narrative where he was still the king and Julian was his loyal subject. He blinked rapidly, a nervous tic manifesting in his left eye. "What is this?" Raymond asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and rising panic. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Julian, did you hear me? I gave you a direct order. Call security. Have this woman removed from the premises immediately. She is trespassing. She is trying to steal our company." He looked at Julian with wild, pleading eyes, expecting the boy he had bullied for 30 years to snap to attention. He expected Julian to apologize, to bow his head, to fix the mess like a good little soldier. But Julian did not move. He stood next to my chair, his posture rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked at his father not with fear, but with a profound, heartbreaking pity. "I cannot do that, Dad," Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "She is not stealing the company. You already lost it." Raymond's face twisted into a snarl. "What are you talking about? I am the CEO. I am your father. Do not speak to me in riddles. Pick up that phone and call security." Julian reached out and placed his hand on the hard drive. He slid it across the glass surface until it rested directly in front of me, like an offering. "It is all there, Sally," Julian said, ignoring his father completely. He looked at me, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "The pension fund transfers, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the bribes paid to the safety inspectors to ignore the hairline cracks in the turbine blades. I copied everything." "Julian," Raymond screamed. It was a raw, animalistic sound. "Shut your mouth. You do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Julian shot back, his voice rising for the first time. He turned to face his father, his chest heaving. I read the files. Dad, I saw the names. 3,000 employees. People who have worked for us for 20 years. You stole their retirement money to pay for your jet fuel and your mistress in Paris. You gutted them. Here is the situation. Raymond, I have a debt. I have the leverage. And now, thanks to your son, I have the smoking gun. I held the hard drive up to the light. This is not just leverage, I continued. This is a federal indictment. This is 20 years in a maximum security prison. This is you, at 60 years old, trading your silk sheets for a concrete cot and a roommate named Bubba. Raymond gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. You wouldn't dare. You want the company, fine. Take it. But you leave me out of it. We can make a deal. I will walk away. I will disappear. We are past the point of gentle negotiations, I said coldly. You called me trash. Raymond, you said I was dirt. You thought you could crush me under your heel because I didn't have a pedigree. But you forgot one thing. Trash is resilient. Trash survives. And sometimes, trash burns your house down. I placed the hard drive back on the table. You have two options, I said, holding up two fingers. Option 1, you sign the sale agreement. You transfer 100% of your voting shares to me for the price of $1. You resign immediately. You issue a public statement citing health reasons. You walk out of here with $0. But you keep your freedom. You get to retire to whatever small, miserable apartment you can afford with your remaining personal savings. I lowered one finger. Option 2. You refuse. I hand this hard drive to the FBI agents waiting in the lobby. They arrest you right now, in front of your lawyers, in front of your son, and in front of the press cameras outside. You go to trial. You lose. You die in prison. I leaned forward. Choose, right now. Raymond stared at me. The reality of his demise was crashing down on him. The walls of his ego were crumbling. He looked at Julian, hoping for a lifeline, hoping for some familial loyalty to kick in. Julian, Raymond whispered. Son, you can't let her do this. I am your father. I built this for you. Everything I did for the family. No, Julian said, shaking his head slowly. You did it for yourself. You used the family as a shield. I am done being your shield, Dad. Something inside Raymond snapped. The facade of the civilized billionaire shattered. The narcissist within him, cornered and exposed, took control. You ungrateful little bastard! Raymond shrieked. He lunged. It happened in slow motion. Raymond scrambled over the glass table, scattering papers and spilling water carafes. He wasn't reaching for the contract. He was reaching for me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred, his teeth bared, his eyes bulging. You viper, he screamed, his hands clawing at the air toward my throat. You ruined everything. I will kill you. I will kill you. You gutter rat. My lawyers gasped and scrambled back. Julian shouted, No, and reached out to grab his father's coat. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I sat perfectly still in my chair, watching him come. I knew something he didn't. I knew that my head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Elias, was standing exactly 3 feet behind the one-way glass of the observation deck door. Before Raymond could get within 2 feet of me, the side door burst open. 2 massive figures in black suits blurred into the room. Raymond never touched me. One guard caught Raymond mid-air. Tackling him with the efficiency of a linebacker, they slammed into the floor with a bone-jarring thud. The breath left Raymond's body in a loud whoosh. Get off me! Get off me! Raymond howled, thrashing against the carpet. The second guard moved in, pinning Raymond's arms behind his back and pressing his face into the floor. The expensive Italian suit ripped at the shoulder seam. His tie was skewed sideways. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a mess of sweat and disarray. The room was deadly silent, save for Raymond's ragged breathing and whimpers of pain. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue blazer. I walked around the end of the table until I was standing directly over him. Raymond Sterling, the titan of aviation, the man who had sneered at waiters and belittled his own son, was now pressed cheek first against the synthetic fibers of my office carpet. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. A trickle of saliva ran from the corner of his mouth. He tried to speak, but only a sob came out. I crouched down. My heels clicked softly on the floor. I brought my face close to his, invading his space just as he had invaded mine at the dinner table. "Look at you," I whispered. My voice was gentle, almost maternal, which made it all the more terrifying. "Where is all that class now? Raymond, where is that breeding you were so proud of?" He stared at me, trembling. "You made a mistake," I said, my voice hardening into diamond. "You thought power came from a name. You thought power came from inheritance. You didn't realize that real power comes from hunger. I was hungry. Raymond, you were just full." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a Mont Blanc pen. It was heavy, black, and expensive. I clicked the cap off. I motioned to Marcus. Marcus picked up the purchase and sale agreement from the table and brought it over. He laid the paper on the floor, right next to Raymond's face. "Sign it," I said. "Please." Raymond whimpered. "Please, Sally, don't do this." "Sign it," I repeated. "Or the next people who walk through that door will be wearing FBI windbreakers and carrying handcuffs." Raymond looked at the paper. He looked at Julian, who had turned away, unable to watch the final degradation of his father. He looked at his lawyers, who were busy studying the ceiling tiles. He was alone. For the first time in his life, Raymond Sterling was completely, utterly alone. He nodded weakly. The guard released his right arm, allowing him just enough movement to write. Raymond took the pen. His hand shook so violently that the tip of the pen tapped a rhythm against the paper. He hesitated for a second, a lifetime of ego fighting against the survival instinct. Then, he broke. A sob racked his body. He pressed the pen to the paper and scrawled his signature. It was messy, jagged, and defeated. Raymond Sterling. He dropped the pen. It rolled away across the carpet. "Get him up," I ordered the guards. Standing up and stepping back, the guards hauled Raymond to his feet. He couldn't stand straight. He slumped, his expensive suit covered in lint. His face wet with tears and snot. He looked 20 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. "Marcus," I said, "verify the signature." Marcus checked the document. "It is valid. Ms. Whitfield, the transfer is complete. You are now the owner of Sterling Aviation." I nodded. "Excellent." I looked at Raymond one last time. "Escort Mr. Sterling to the exit," I said. "And do not use the main elevator. Use the freight elevator in the back. It is where the trash goes." Raymond flinched as if I had slapped him. He opened his mouth to retort, to scream, to say anything, but the fight was gone. He hung his head as the guards dragged him toward the door. He looked back at Julian. "You," Raymond croaked, "you are dead to me." Julian didn't turn around. He stared out the glass wall at the city skyline. "I know, Dad. I was dead to you the moment I developed a conscience." The doors hissed shut behind Raymond Sterling. The room was quiet again. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of victory. It didn't smell like champagne. It smelled like ozone and cold justice. I turned to the 10 lawyers sitting at the table. They were staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice brisk and professional, "file the paperwork with the SEC immediately. I want the press release out in 20 minutes. Announce the acquisition, announce the rebranding, and freeze all remaining assets of the former CEO pending an internal audit." "Yes, Ms. Whitfield," they chorused, scrambling to open their laptops. I walked over to the window where Julian was standing. He was looking down at the street, watching as a small, disheveled figure was shoved out of the service entrance 70 stories below. "Are you okay?" I asked. Julian let out a long, shuddering breath. He turned to look at me. His eyes were sad, but clear. "No," he said honestly. "I am not okay. I just destroyed my family." "You destroyed a tumor." "Julian," I said. "The patient might still survive." He looked at the hard drive still sitting on the table. "What happened to that?" "That is my insurance policy," I said. "As long as Raymond stays quiet, as long as he stays retired and doesn't try to harm this company or you, it stays in my safe. If he makes one move, I mail it to the district attorney." Julian nodded. "Fair enough." He adjusted his jacket. He looked stripped down. Raw. The arrogance of the sterling name was gone, but something new was taking its place. "I should go," Julian said. "I need to figure out who I am if I'm not Sterling." "Julian," I said, stopping him as he turned to leave. He paused. "You were brave today," I said. "Braver than I gave you credit for." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "It is amazing what you can do when you have nothing left to lose. Goodbye, Sally, or Ms. Whitfield." "Goodbye, Julian," I said. He walked out of the room, alone. I turned back to the empty conference table. The $1 contract lay on the floor where Raymond had signed it. I walked over and picked it up. I held it in my hands. A billion-dollar airline, bought for the price of a vending machine soda and a lot of nerve. I walked to the head of the table and sat down in the chair Raymond had claimed was his. It was comfortable. It fit perfectly. I pressed the intercom button on the table. "Marcus," I said, "get the branding team in here. We need a new name for the airline. Something that implies strength. Something that implies rising from the ashes." "Sterling Horizon," Marcus suggested through the speaker. "Perfect," I said. "Let's get to work." The king was dead. Long live the queen. The ink on the single-page contract was barely dry when I turned to Elias. My head of security, Raymond Sterling, was standing by the door, slumped against the frame like a suit that had been emptied of its man. He looked hollow. The rage that had fueled him moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind only the trembling shell of a defeated narcissist. "Remove him," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the conference room. Elias stepped forward, gripping Raymond's elbow with a firmness that allowed for no negotiation. "This way, Mr. Sterling." Raymond stumbled. Trying to regain some semblance of dignity, he reached up to straighten his tie, but his hands were shaking too violently. He looked toward the main glass doors, the grand entrance he had walked through only an hour ago with his entourage of lawyers. "Not that way," I interjected. Raymond froze and looked back at me, confusion clouding his watery eyes. "You mentioned something at dinner." "Raymond," I said, walking slowly around the table. "You said that people like me, the help, the trash, the service staff, should know our place. You said we belong in the background. You said we should use the service entrance." I pointed to a heavy, gray metal door in the far corner of the room. It was the freight elevator access, used by the janitorial staff to haul trash bags and cleaning supplies. "That is your exit," I said. "It opens into the alley behind the building. It seems fitting." Raymond's face crumbled. For a man who had spent his life obsessing over appearances, being paraded out through the garbage chute was a fate worse than bankruptcy. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand the main lobby, but Elias nudged him forward. "Move," Elias said. I watched as the heavy metal door slid open. The interior was scuffed steel, smelling faintly of ammonia and refuse. Raymond Sterling, the billionaire aviator, stepped inside. The last image I had of him was his hunched back as the doors clamped shut, sealing him away from the world of power he used to rule. "He is gone," Marcus said, stepping up beside me. "The lobby is clear." "Good," I said, turning away from the freight elevator. "Now, let us go talk to the world." The press conference was scheduled for 20 minutes later in the atrium of the Oceanic Core Tower. By the time I took the elevator down, the space was packed. Every major financial news network, aviation blog, and tabloid reporter in New York had squeezed into the room. The air was thick with the electricity of a breaking scandal. I walked onto the stage alone. No lawyers, no Julian, just me. The flashbulbs erupted like a thunderstorm. I stood at the podium, waiting for the noise to die down. I wore the same midnight blue suit I had worn to dismantle Raymond, a visual signal that I was not a caretaker. I was a conqueror. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice amplified clearly across the hall. "My name is Sally Whitfield. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Oceanic Corp has completed the acquisition of 100% of the assets and liabilities of Sterling Aviation." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. They knew about the trouble, but a full acquisition in 48 hours was unheard of. "This morning, Raymond Sterling resigned from his position as CEO," I continued, keeping my face impassive. "He has left the building and will hold no future role in this company." A reporter from the Wall Street Journal raised his hand, shouting over the others, "Ms. Whitfield, is it true the company is insolvent? Are you declaring bankruptcy? What about the 3,000 employees?" I looked directly into the camera lens, addressing the terrified families watching at home. "There will be no bankruptcy," I stated firmly, "and there will be no layoffs." The room went silent. "Effective immediately, Sterling Aviation is dead," I announced. "In its place, we are launching a new entity, Sterling Horizon. We are rebranding, we are rebuilding, and we are starting by correcting the sins of the past." I paused for effect. "I have authorized the immediate reinstatement of the Employee Pension Fund. The $40 million that was misappropriated by the previous administration has been returned to the accounts as of 10 minutes ago." "Where did the money come from?" another reporter yelled. "The company has no cash." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "The funds were secured through the liquidation of Raymond Sterling's personal assets," I said. "As part of the purchase agreement, Mr. Sterling has surrendered his real estate holdings in the Hamptons, his private collection of vintage aircraft, and his offshore accounts to cover the debts he incurred. He stole from his people. I made sure he paid them back." The room exploded with noise. It was the sound of a narrative shifting. In seconds, Raymond went from a tragic victim of a hostile takeover to a villain who had been stripped of his ill-gotten gains. I had not just fired him, I had publicly castrated him financially. "Sterling Horizon will fly again," I said, concluding the conference. "But this time, we will fly with integrity." I walked off the stage to the sound of applause. It was rare for a corporate raider to be cheered, but I had given them a Robin Hood story. I had taken it from the king and given it back to the peasants. Back in my office, the atmosphere was quieter, heavier. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by the sober reality of the work ahead. I sat at my desk, looking at the city skyline. My phone was buzzing incessantly with congratulations from bankers and politicians who had ignored me 2 days ago. I ignored them all. There was a knock on the door. It was soft, hesitant. "Come in," I said. The door opened and Julian walked in. He had removed his tie completely now. He held a white envelope in his hand. He looked exhausted, as if he had aged 10 years in a single morning. But there was a calmness to him that I had never seen before. He walked to my desk and placed the envelope on the polished wood surface. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "My resignation," Julian said. "I am stepping down as Vice President of Operations. I am removing myself from the board." I looked at the envelope, then up at him. "You don't have to do that. Julian, I meant what I said downstairs. No layoffs. That applies to you too. You helped me today. You earned your seat." "No," Julian shook his head slowly. "I didn't earn anything. I just stopped a crime. That doesn't make me an executive. It just makes me not a criminal." He walked over to the window, standing where I had stood earlier, looking out at the empire his father had built and lost. "I need to leave, Sally," he said quietly. "I have spent my entire life in that building, under his shadow. I don't know who I am without the name Sterling attached to a title. I need to find out." "Where will you go?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I will finally go to art school. Maybe I will just drive for a while. But I can't stay here. The air in this city tastes like him. I stood up and walked around the desk. I stood a few feet away from him, close enough to smell the faint scent of his cologne, the one I used to love, but far enough to maintain the boundary that now existed between us. I understand, I said. Julian turned to face me. His eyes searched mine, looking for a trace of the woman he had engaged. I am sorry. Sally, I know I have said it 1,000 times in my head, but I need to say it to your face. I am sorry I didn't stand up for you at dinner. I was a coward. I was so afraid of him cutting me off that I let him cut you down. You were a coward, I agreed. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't offer him a cheap absolution. It hurts, Julian. It hurt more than anything your father said. He was an enemy. You were supposed to be my partner. I know, Julian whispered. He looked down at his shoes. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I definitely don't expect you to take me back. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. What did you do today? It was incredible. You are incredible. He reached out, as if to touch my hand, but stopped himself mid-motion. He pulled his hand back, respecting the distance. Can we? He hesitated. Is there a chance in the future, once I figure this out, once I become the man I should have been? The question hung in the air. It would have been easy to say yes. It would have been easy to fall back into the comfort of our old dynamic. I still loved him, in a way, but I loved the Julian who could be, not the Julian who was, and I loved myself too much to settle for a project. I don't know, I said honestly. You have a long road ahead of you. Julian, you are 30 years old, and you are just now taking your first step alone. You need to learn how to walk before you can try to run with me. I crossed my arms. You need to grow up. You need to prove that you are not just Raymond Sterling's son with a conscience. You need to build something of your own. You need to fail and pick yourself up without a safety net. Julian nodded. Accepting the verdict? Fair enough. Don't do it for me, I added sternly. If you change just to win me back, you will resent me eventually. Do it for yourself. Prove to yourself that you are not a copy of him. I will, Julian said. He looked at me one last time, memorizing my face. Goodbye, Sally. Goodbye, Julian, I said. He turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back. He opened it and stepped out into the hallway, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a soft click. I was alone in the office. I walked back to my desk and picked up the resignation letter. I didn't open it. I simply placed it in the drawer. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a clean slate. I pressed the intercom button. Marcus, I said. Yes, Ms. Whitfield. Send a memo to HR, I instructed. Process Julian Sterling's resignation. Pay out his accrued vacation time. And Marcus. Yes. Make sure he keeps his security clearance for the building, I said softly. Just the lobby access, in case he ever wants to visit. Understood, Marcus replied. I leaned back in my chair. The sun was setting over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the city. The war was over. Raymond was gone. Julian was gone. I had won. I had company. I had the power. I had revenge. But as I sat there, watching the lights of the city flicker on one by one, I realized that the hardest part wasn't destroying the enemy. The hardest part was rebuilding the world after the battle. I picked up the file for Sterling Horizon. Let's get to work, I whispered to the empty room. I opened the folder. The first page was a list of the flight routes. I picked up my pen, the same pen Raymond had used to sign his life away, and began to make corrections. The past was dead. The future was waiting to be written. And this time, I was holding the pen. The calendar on my digital dashboard flipped to January 29th. It had been exactly 365 days. 1 year. In the world of logistics, a year is measured in ton miles, in fuel efficiency, and in the relentless movement of cargo from point A to point B. But for me, This last year had been measured in the reconstruction of a soul, both mine and the company's. I stood in the center of the operations control center of Sterling Horizon. It was no longer the panic-filled room where Raymond used to scream at subordinates. It was a symphony of efficiency. The walls were lined with massive screens tracking our fleet of 200 aircraft moving across the globe like a constellation of man-made stars. We were no longer just a regional player. We were the #1 cargo carrier in the Northern Hemisphere. We had secured contracts with the 3 largest e-commerce giants in the world. Our stock price had tripled since the acquisition. The pension fund was solvent, overfunded by 15%. Actually, Ms. Whitfield, Marcus said, appearing at my elbow with his usual silent precision. The car is waiting downstairs. You do not want to be late for your own party. I smiled. I am never late. Marcus, I just arrive exactly when the anticipation peaks. Of course, he replied, a rare smirk touching his lips. The dress looks adequate. It was more than adequate. It was a statement. It was a gown of deep, shimmering emerald green, the color of money. Yes, but also the color of life and renewal. It was a far cry from the sensible navy dress I had worn to the Hamptons, while I was preparing to step into the light. Across the river in a cramped neighborhood in Queens, a very different evening was unfolding. I knew where Raymond Sterling lived. I didn't have him watched anymore. He was too insignificant to waste resources on, but I knew he lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in Astoria. It was a small, brick building with a radiator that clanged in the middle of the night and a view of a brick wall. I imagined him sitting there. His assets had been liquidated to the penny to pay back the pension fund. The Hamptons estate was sold to a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley. The private jets were auctioned off. Even his wine collection, including that 1982 vintage he loved so much, had been sold to cover his legal fees. He was likely sitting in his armchair, the only piece of quality furniture he had managed to keep, reading Forbes magazine. I was on the cover this month. The headline read, "The Phoenix of Aviation, How Sally Whitfield Turned a Crashing Airline into a Gold Mine." I wondered if he stared at my face. I wondered if he traced the line of my jaw, the same jaw he had once dismissed as common. I wondered if he realized that the trash he had thrown out was now the only thing keeping his family name relevant. Even if hyphenated, his phone wouldn't be ringing. The friends he thought he had, the senators, the bankers, the socialites, had evaporated the moment his credit score dropped below 700. That is the thing about the circle Raymond ran in. Loyalty is a subscription service, and Raymond could no longer pay the monthly fee. To the Metropolitan Museum, I told my driver as I slid into the back of the town car. The gala was being held in the Temple of Dender. It was the premier charity event of the season. Raising money for underprivileged students to study engineering and logistics, I was the host. When I walked in, the room didn't just go quiet. It shifted. The energy gravitated toward me. A year ago, these same people would have looked through me. They would have whispered about my shoes or my lack of pedigree. Tonight, they parted like the Red Sea. Sally, darling. It was the woman with the fake diamonds from the dinner. Only now she was wearing real ones, likely purchased after her husband's business recovered thanks to a shipping contract with my company. "You look absolutely stunning. We must have lunch. I have a niece who is dying to intern at Sterling Horizon." "I will have my assistant look into her resume," I said coolly. Moving past her, I navigated the room with the ease of a shark swimming through a reef. I shook hands with senators who now sought my donation. I nodded to bankers who were desperate to underwrite my next expansion. I was not arrogant, but I was undeniable. I had built a throne out of their doubt, and now they were all kneeling. And then, I saw him. He was standing near the edge of the room, away from the main bar. He wasn't surrounded by an entourage. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, looking at the Egyptian sandstone with a thoughtful expression. Julian. My heart gave a small, familiar thud, but it wasn't painful anymore. It was just an echo. He looked different, the heaviness that used to hang on his shoulders, The slump of a man constantly waiting to be yelled at was gone. He stood taller. He had lost a little weight, his face sharper, more defined. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a sharp, modern suit, charcoal gray. No tie. Top button unbuttoned. It looked like something he had picked out himself, not something a stylist had forced on him. He sensed my gaze and turned. For a moment, the noise of the party faded, the clinking glasses, the jazz band, the laughter. It was just the two of us across the room, connected by a history that was equal parts love and trauma. He smiled. It wasn't the apologetic, terrified smile of the old Julian. It was a genuine, warm expression. He began to walk toward me. He didn't rush. He didn't look nervous. He walked like a man who belonged in the room. "Hello? Sally," he said when he reached me. "Hello, Julian," I replied. "I didn't know you were on the guest list." "I wasn't," he admitted with a chuckle. "I bought a ticket, a standard admission ticket, not a VIP table. I wanted to support the cause, engineering scholarships for kids like you used to be." I looked at him, impressed. A standard ticket cost $5,000. "I heard about your startup," I said. "Clean currents, something about wind energy." "Solar logistics," he corrected, his eyes lighting up. "We are designing portable solar grids for disaster relief zones. It is small. We only have 12 employees. We work out of a converted garage in Brooklyn, but we deployed our first unit to a hurricane zone last month, and it worked. We kept the field hospital powered for 3 days." "That is incredible." "Julian," I said, and I meant it. "You built that." "I did," he said. "No family money, no loans from your bank. Just me and a few engineers I met at a coffee shop. It is hard work. I take the subway. I eat ramen more than I should. But I sleep at night. I sleep really well." He looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my face, my dress, the room that I commanded. "You look powerful, Sally," he said softly. "You look like you were born for this." "I had to grow into it," I said. "Just like you." "I saw the magazine," he continued. "My father. I sent him a copy. I don't talk to him, really, but I mailed it to him with a note. It just said, 'She won.'" "That was cruel," I said, though a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "It was necessary," Julian replied. "He needs to see it. He needs to understand that the world doesn't work the way he thought it did." A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. Julian reached out and took 2 glasses. He handed one to me. "To Sterling Horizon," he proposed, raising his glass. "To clean currents," I countered, clinking my glass against his. The crystal rang out a clear, pure sound, so different from the dull thud of the spoon dropping at that disastrous dinner a year ago. "I am happy for you, Julian," I said. "Truly?" "I am happy for us," he said. "We survived him. We both got out." He took a sip of his drink, then looked at me with a hesitation that was charming rather than weak. "I know you are busy," he said, "running the world and all, but my office is in Brooklyn. There's a great pizza place around the corner. Not 5-star, paper plates, plastic forks, but the sauce is amazing." He paused, gauging my reaction. "If you ever want to debrief, as equals, I would like that." I looked at him. I saw the man standing before me, a man who had walked away from billions to find his own conscience, a man who was building something real, however small. He wasn't the boy who let his father abuse me. He was a man asking a woman on a date, knowing full well she could crush him, but asking anyway. "Pizza," I mused. "I haven't had a good slice of pizza in a year." "It is on me," Julian smiled. "I can afford it now. I made a profit of $400 last month." I laughed. It felt light. It felt easy. "Call my assistant." "Julian," I said. "She will find a slot in my calendar. I might be free next Tuesday." Julian's smile widened. "Next Tuesday? I will be there." He didn't linger. He didn't try to monopolize my time. He nodded respectfully and walked back into the crowd. I watched him go. He didn't look back. And I liked that. He was moving forward. I needed air. I walked through the crowd, accepting compliments with a nod, until I reached the glass doors that led to the terrace overlooking Central Park. I stepped out into the cold January night. The wind bit at my skin, but I didn't feel it. I felt alive. Below me, New York City was a sprawling grid of diamonds. The lights of the skyscrapers twinkled against the darkness. I walked to the stone railing and looked down. 1 year ago, I had driven out of a gate in the Hamptons feeling small, dirty, and discarded. I had the word trash branded onto my psyche. I had felt the crushing weight of a class system designed to keep people like me out. I raised my glass of wine to the city. It wasn't the 1982 vintage Raymond had cherished. It was a young Pinot Noir from a vineyard in Oregon that I had personally invested in. It was bold, complex, and unpretentious. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. I thought about Raymond alone in his apartment. I thought about the woman with the fake diamonds. I thought about the people who believed that value was determined by who your father was. They were wrong. Value is determined by how much heat you can take before you melt. I swirled the wine in the glass, watching the red liquid catch the light of the moon. They called me trash to throw me away, but they forgot that a diamond is just a piece of coal that handled the pressure well, and now, I am the only one shining. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed watching justice be served, please subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and give us a like to help this story reach even more people.